Uncle Harlan laughed mid-dinner with his fork raised like he was conducting the entire table. He looked around first, making sure he had the room, making sure everyone was watching before he delivered the thing he'd clearly been saving. "One niece has a career," he said, nodding toward my cousin Sabine, who sat beside him. Sabine smiled politely, the specific smile of someone used to being held up as a comparison. Then Harlan turned to me, grinning wide, eyes bright with the pleasure of someone about to say something they'd already rehearsed in their head. "And the other has excuses." The laughter was quick, cowardly, the kind that leaked out of people before they could think about whether they wanted to be laughing. My cheeks burned immediately. My hands went numb around my glass. I felt my mom's eyes landing on me from across the table. The silent, urgent weight of her look, begging me not to react. Harlan wiped his mouth. "Ione's always got a reason, don't you?" he added, comfortable, like he'd made a simple observation. My throat tightened. I forced a smile, swallowed the humiliation, but inside something settled into a decision. Calm and final and completely clear. If he wanted to measure worth, I was going to measure accountability. "My name is Ione Marlowe. I'm tired of my life being translated by people who never had to live a single day of it." In the bathroom, I gripped the sink, breathed through the sting behind my eyes, listened to Harlan's voice carrying through the wall. His laugh, the boom of it, filling every room he was in, whether people wanted it to or not. When I stepped back out, my aunt intercepted me near the hallway. She patted my arm the way people patted things they were trying to calm rather than comfort. "He's just trying to motivate you," she whispered. Motivate. Like cruelty handed to someone with a smile was actually a service they should be grateful for. My mom was still not looking at me, staring at her plate with the focused attention of someone hoping that if they studied the food long enough, the difficult thing would resolve itself. Sabine gave me a small glance across the table. Apologetic. The kind that acknowledged something happened without committing to any responsibility for it. And I understood something clearly standing there in the hallway. Every person at that table had been trained to treat Harlan's disrespect the way you treated difficult weather. You acknowledged it was unpleasant, and then you waited for it to pass. I was done doing that. My best friend Odelia called while I was still driving home. She listened without interrupting while I told her what happened. I kept my voice casual, steady, the voice of someone reporting facts rather than falling apart. My hands told a different story. They were shaking on the steering wheel. When I finished, Odelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know you're not lazy, right?" Those 6 words cracked something open in my chest that I hadn't known needed cracking. Because my excuses, the word Harlan had used so easily, so publicly, so comfortably, were not what they sounded like in his version. They were hospital waiting rooms at 2 a.m. They were medication schedules and insurance calls and grocery budgets stretched thin across weeks. They were hours of unpaid caregiving that nobody clapped for and nobody put on a resume. "He makes it sound like I chose this," I whispered. Odelia said, "He needs you to look like a mess, so he looks like a hero." I sat in my parked car outside my apartment for a while after that, not crying, thinking, because that sentence had landed with the specific weight of something that was both deeply obvious and something I had never let myself say out loud before. Harlan called 2 days after Thanksgiving. His voice was warm in the particular way it was warm when he was offering something he needed you to accept. "Ione," he said, "I've been thinking. I'm willing to help you stop making excuses." My stomach tightened immediately. He laid out the offer. A job at his logistics company. Admin work. Easy, he called it. The word easy said in the specific tone that meant beneath what a real person would need effort for. "You can learn what real work looks like," he added, followed by a laugh that suggested the comment was friendly. I heard my mom's voice in the background. She'd overheard. "Maybe this is good for her," she said. Good. Like my dignity was a negotiable variable if the outcome included a paycheck. I held the phone and thought for one long moment. Harlan wanted me in his office because it meant he could manage the story, could point to himself as the generous uncle who gave his struggling niece a chance. But I had my own reason to say yes. If I was going to understand what was actually happening inside his operation, I needed to see it up close. Okay, I said. Harlan's tone brightened, satisfied, like a door had just closed around something. Good, he said. He had no idea the door was opening for me. Harlan's office smelled like cheap coffee and the specific energy of a person who liked controlling small spaces. He introduced me to the staff on my first morning, loudly, the way he did everything. This is my niece, he announced to the open room. She's getting her life together. A few people smiled at me, the awkward kind. The kind that was actually embarrassment dressed as friendliness. My cheeks burned. I nodded and sat at the desk he pointed me toward. He dropped a stack of invoices in front of me. Don't mess these up, he said. Like he was being generous with the warning. I worked through the morning quietly, efficiently, checking everything twice. By lunchtime, I noticed something. A driver stood near the kitchen doorway talking to another staff member in a low voice. He was pointing at something on his phone screen. Numbers. His expression was tightened with frustration. He must have said something within Harlan's range because Harlan appeared in the hallway immediately. Stop making excuses, Harlan said to the driver. Pointed. Final. The driver went quiet. I watched this from my desk. The same phrase, used the same way, with the same dismissive pleasure. He didn't just use it on family, he used it on everyone. My stomach turned slowly. I kept my face neutral and went back to the invoices. My first paycheck was short, not slightly short. Missing hours short, a gap I could calculate clearly against the days I had worked and the time I had clocked. I went to payroll calmly. The woman there spoke in a lowered voice. Harlan adjusts things, she said. Like adjusting was a neutral word for a neutral process. I went to Harlan directly. I kept my tone polite, factual, gave him the numbers simply. He leaned back in his chair and laughed the easy laugh of someone who found my accuracy amusing rather than concerning. You're getting paid while you're learning, he said. You should be grateful for that. Learning. Like the work I'd completed wasn't real work. Like invoices I'd processed correctly weren't actually processed. I felt heat move through my chest. I kept my face completely still. I worked the hours, I said. Harlan's smirk settled into something more deliberate. Excuses again, he said. I nodded once, said nothing more. That night, I opened my laptop, started a new document, date, start time, end time, tasks completed, any communications about pay or assignments. Every single entry documented with screenshots where possible, every email printed and saved. Not out of pettiness, out of the cold, steady understanding that I was going to need every minute of this. Sabine came by the office on a Thursday afternoon. Coffee for Harlan. The kind of visit that communicated she was part of the inner circle, that she moved through this space with a different status than the rest of the staff. She smiled at me when she arrived, warm, the smile of someone who had decided that the Thanksgiving moment was behind us now that some time had passed. When Harlan stepped away to take a call, Sabine lingered near my desk. He's hard on you because he wants you to succeed, she said quietly, carefully. I looked at her for a moment. Does he want the drivers to succeed too? I said. When he shaves their overtime? Sabine went still. What? My hours were short, I said, keeping my voice low and completely even. When I asked payroll, they said he adjusts things. Sabine's face moved through something complicated, conflicted. The expression of someone whose organized understanding of a situation had just developed a crack. That could have been a mistake, she said finally. Mistake. The family word for something that was deliberate but too uncomfortable to name accurately. Sabine left shortly after with her expression tighter than it had been coming in. I watched her go. She'd built her professional identity in Harlan's orbit, believed in the version of him that she'd been given. She was about to find out what the version actually looked like from the inside. I found the folder on a Tuesday morning. It was sitting in the shared company drive, labeled simply Reclass. I opened it. Spreadsheets. Row after row of driver names and hours. 2 columns, original hours logged, hours reclassified, the overtime column in the original, the flat rate column in the reclassified version. I sat very still in front of my screen, because what I was looking at wasn't a mistake in any sense. Wasn't an oversight. Wasn't an administrative error that reasonable people would clean up when it was pointed out. It was a system, built deliberately, running consistently. generating savings for Harlan's operation by removing compensation that employees had earned and were legally owed. My hands shook slightly as I moved through the files. I opened my personal email in a separate tab, forwarded myself the key documents. Then I opened a cloud storage account on my personal device and copied the files to a secure folder. That afternoon, Harlan was on speakerphone with a client in his glass-walled office. "We run lean around here," I heard him say. "Easy. Proud. No dead weight." I looked at the screen, at the spreadsheets open in a background tab. He was confessing, casually, to anyone who understood what they were hearing. I understood. Harlan started assigning extra tasks the third week. Things that weren't in my original role. Things he delivered at the end of the workday with the specific carelessness of someone who had already decided the cost didn't apply to them. "Finish those at home," he said, dropping a folder on my desk at 4:50. "You don't have kids. You have time." Time. Like my hours outside work were his to allocate because he had evaluated my life and found it less full than others. When I mentioned carefully that the tasks weren't part of my paid role, Harlan laughed. "Family discount," he said. Like those two words were a complete answer. Like the combination of the word family and the word discount made exploitation into generosity. I nodded, said nothing. That night, I opened my documentation file, added the date, the time the folder was placed on my desk, the nature of the tasks, the exact phrase, family discount. Added it to the running log that was growing longer every week. Odelia called while I was still at my laptop. "You need to set a boundary," she said. "I'm building one," I told her. The difference between setting and building felt important. Setting was immediate. Building was something else. Something that would hold weight when it was finally placed. Harlan hosted a small family dinner 6 weeks into my time at the company. He was in full performance mode. Big voice, generous gestures. The version of himself he ran when he had an audience he was trying to impress. Midway through the meal, he looked around the table with the expression of someone about to give a gift. "I want everyone to know," he said, "that I gave Ione a job, basically built her career from the ground up." People laughed. Warm and uncritical. My mom smiled the specific smile of someone who felt relief rather than happiness. Sabine's smile was stiffer, less practiced. Harlan looked at me. "Tell everyone how much I've helped you," he said. My throat tightened. I kept my voice steady and pleasant. "I've been working," I said, "and I appreciate fair pay." The table went quiet. Harlan's smile tightened at the edges. Then he laughed loudly and turned to the room. "See?" he said. "Excuses." The laughter came back, uneasy. A few people smiled into their plates rather than at him. I stared at my glass and understood exactly what this dinner was. He was delivering his version of me to this room, building his narrative in front of witnesses. Making sure his story about who I was existed loudly and publicly before mine had any chance to. A driver named Cassian stopped me in the hallway outside the break room. He looked both ways first. The specific look of someone who had learned to be careful about who heard them. "He's doing it to you too," Cassian said. Quiet. Certain. I looked at him. "The hours?" Cassian nodded. Jaw tight. "He shaves them. Anyone who questions it gets the same line." He paused. "You're making excuses." My stomach turned, not from surprise, I'd known, but hearing it confirmed by someone else who had lived it landed differently. "There are others?" I asked. "All the drivers," Cassian said. His voice was bitter in the particular way of someone who had been angry about something for a long time and had stopped expecting anything to change. "We've talked about reporting him, but Harlan knows everyone. He controls what people hear about you in this industry. People are scared. Scared of the story he'd tell. Scared of what happened to your reputation when someone with Harlan's social reach decided you were a problem. Start documenting," I said. "Write down every hour. Keep every message." Cassian looked at me, uncertain. Then something shifted in his expression, moving from resigned to something that hadn't been there before. "You think it'll matter?" he asked. "It will," I said, "if we do it right." I wasn't alone in this anymore. That changed something. Harlan placed a document on my desk on a Friday morning. "New agreement," he said. Easy, like it was routine paperwork. I picked it up. Contractor classification, not employee, which meant no overtime eligibility, no benefits, no labor protections that applied to employees. My stomach dropped as I read. This protects both of us, Harlan said. Both of us. Said in the specific way that meant entirely him. I kept my expression neutral. I'd like to review it before I sign, I said. Harlan's warmth disappeared. Immediate, like a switch. You don't trust me? He said. I trust paperwork, I replied. He laughed once, sharp. Excuses. He tried to leave it with me like I was going to sign it that afternoon. I didn't sign. A text arrived from him that evening. If you can't commit to the agreement, don't bother coming in Monday. My hands went cold. Then Odelia called. I read her the text. She was quiet for a moment. Talia. Ione, that's retaliation, she said. For not signing something that strips your legal protections. That's not just cruelty anymore. The word retaliation sat in the air between us. I wrote down the time. The exact words. Added the screenshot to the folder. It had just become legally significant. Odelia connected me with an attorney named Juno Vance. We met on a Tuesday evening in her office. I brought the documentation folder, the printed logs, the forwarded emails, the screenshots from the reclass spreadsheet. Juno was methodical. She moved through each page without hurrying. Her expression was professionally still. Then she set the folder down. This is wage theft, she said, not dramatically, like she was identifying a specific category of documented fact. My stomach twisted despite already knowing what I'd found. Juno explained the options clearly, a formal labor complaint to the relevant agency. A demand letter sent to Harlan directly. Protected reporting status, which meant he couldn't legally retaliate against me for bringing a complaint. Which do you want? She asked. Justice or revenge? I thought about the question honestly. Both, I admitted. Juno nodded like that was a reasonable and unsurprising answer. Then we do it clean, she said. Clean means the documentation is so solid that he has no credible counter-argument. Clean means the process works the way it's supposed to. She told me to continue working while documenting, to be consistent, to capture everything. The longer the paper trail, she said, the harder the landing. I walked out of her office feeling two things simultaneously, sick, and for the first time in months, genuinely steady. Sabine asked me to coffee on a Saturday morning. She looked tired. The specific tired of someone whose carefully organized life had developed a stress fracture, and they hadn't yet decided how to talk about it. Harlan told me, you're being ungrateful, she said. Carefully. Not accusingly. Like she was presenting it for my response rather than delivering it as a verdict. I laughed once. Short and involuntary. He stole my wages, I said. Sabine flinched. I opened my phone. Walked her through the numbers. The hours logged versus the hours paid. The reclass folder and what it contained. The pattern across multiple employees. Sabine looked at each thing I showed her. Her face moved slowly. The specific movement of someone whose existing understanding was being replaced by something they didn't want. That can't be the whole picture, she said finally. Those are the folder names on the company drive, I said. I can show you the timestamps. Sabine's mouth went tight. He's my mentor, she said, voice smaller than it had been. He's your mentor because he needs your loyalty, I said quietly. Having the career niece in his corner means the comparison stays clean. Sabine was silent for a long moment. Then she said, what do you need from me? And the career niece stopped being above me. She was simply beside me now. Harlan started hovering. It began subtly, appearing near my desk more often than workflow required, asking questions about what I was working on. Glancing at my screen, one afternoon he said loudly, to nobody in particular and entirely at me, Ione's becoming a little detective. My stomach tightened. I kept my expression easy. Then I came in the following morning and opened the shared drive. The reclass folder was gone. My heart dropped for exactly 3 seconds. Then I remembered I'd copied everything to my personal cloud storage weeks earlier. The originals were secured. Harlan walked past my desk mid-morning, stopped. Leaned slightly toward me. Don't get ideas, he said, very low, very controlled. The chill in it was deliberate. Ideas like what? I asked. Ideas like acting like you're not lucky to be here. I held his gaze for a moment. Even. Steady. I'm working, I said. Harlan smiled thinly. Moved on. I turned back to my screen. He'd deleted the folder because he'd sensed something shifting. Because whatever antenna Harlan used to detect threats had picked something up. The deletion didn't weaken the case. It strengthened it. Because people who had nothing to hide didn't delete folders from shared drives after someone started asking about missing wages. The schedule cuts came at the start of the following week. My hours were reduced. Tasks I'd been handling were quietly reassigned without explanation or conversation. Harlan made an announcement in the general office area on Wednesday afternoon. Some people, he said, not looking at me but speaking at a volume that meant everyone in the room would understand who he meant, don't have the stamina for real work. He moved on immediately, like it had been an observation about weather. I documented the hour, the words, and the witnesses who were present. Cassian texted me that same evening. He cut my route too. It's starting. He's doing it to everyone who might speak. I read the message twice. Then I called my mom that night. She was crying before I'd finished explaining. Why are you fighting him? She said. He's family. He helped us. Helped us. And there it was. The architecture Harlan had been building for years without me fully seeing it. He had positioned himself as the family's benefactor, had made himself useful in ways that created obligation, had built a web of gratitude around himself so thoroughly that questioning his behavior felt like attacking someone who had been generous. That web protected him. It was the most important thing I needed to dismantle, and the only thing that would dismantle it was documentation. Sabine came to my apartment late on a Thursday. She knocked without calling first. Her face, when I opened the door, was the face of someone carrying something they couldn't carry alone anymore. She sat on my couch and placed a letter on the coffee table between us. I picked it up. Official letterhead. The company's name at the top. A notice about overdue payroll tax filings. Not a small amount, not a clerical oversight, significant. The kind of amount that indicated a pattern of non-compliance rather than an isolated error. My stomach dropped. Where did you find this? I asked. His office, Sabine said. He left it. I don't think he realized. Her hands were shaking. If the company goes under because of this, she said, people lose their jobs, the drivers, the admin staff, all of them. I sat with that. That's on him, I said quietly. Not on us for knowing the truth. Sabine wiped her eyes. He goes around talking about everything he's built, she whispered. How hard he worked, how much he sacrificed. She paused. But this is what's actually underneath it. I understood then. Harlan's hatred of excuses wasn't philosophy, it was projection. His entire operation was built on borrowed time and unpaid obligations. His whole life was a deadline he'd been avoiding. I met Juno at her office the following week. She had drafted the demand letter. It outlined the wage theft documentation, the reclassification of overtime, the retaliation following my refusal to sign the contractor agreement, the protected status of my complaint. It gave Harlan a specific window, a date, a deadline to return all owed wages and cease retaliatory actions before the complaint escalated to the labor agency. Juno set it on the desk between us. Do you want to send it now? She asked. My heart was pounding. I thought through the timing. If I sent it immediately, Harlan's response would be immediate and loud. He would mobilize family, would activate the network of people who believed his version of events, would smear me in every direction he could reach before the process had time to build its own weight. Not yet, I said. Let the paper trail get stronger first. Juno nodded. I'll set a date. A deadline. The word settled in my chest with a weight that felt entirely different from the word excuses. Deadlines were about responsibility, about the moment when avoidance became a choice and choices had consequences. Harlan had lived his entire life without a real deadline for anything he'd done. That was ending. Soon. Thanksgiving arrived again, like a clock returning to its starting position. Harlan hosted. Of course he did. He'd added clients this year, church contacts, business partners, people whose admiration he was collecting and curating for the speech he had clearly been planning. Sabine told me quietly, a week before, he's planning something at the table. My stomach tightened. I called Juno. Public exposure isn't the goal, Juno said. Not as a performance. The goal is accountability through process. I know, I said. But the process needs a moment. Juno was quiet. Then, if the moment presents itself and you're prepared, let the facts speak. I told Cassian. He and 2 other drivers had been documenting their own hours for 2 months. Clean records. timestamps, communications with Harlan about pay that he'd dismissed with the same phrases. Cassian said he'd be ready to file statements. Sabine said she would testify about the tax letter and the deleted folders. My hands shook while I made notes that evening. Not from fear, from the weight of what we were building. From understanding that when it finally landed, it was going to land on all the people who deserved it and leave the people who didn't, standing in cleaner air. That was worth the shaking. Harlan announced a company gratitude dinner tied to Thanksgiving. Formal. A rented venue. Invited donors, business partners, clients, staff required to attend. He described it as celebrating what we'd built together. Built together. Said about an operation sustained by stolen overtime and misclassified hours. I called Juno immediately. She listened. Then she said one word. Perfect. We finalized the timeline. The demand letter would be delivered the morning of the event. It would give Harlan a clear, specific window to respond and make corrections before the formal agency complaint was filed. He'll ignore it, I said. If he ignores it, Juno said, then what happens next is entirely his choice. The letter protects you. The deadline defines him. I sat with that, the whole mechanism of it. For years, Harlan had made me feel like I was the one who needed to be accountable, who needed to prove something, who needed to stop making excuses and start meeting standards he set and move depending on what served his narrative. The demand letter didn't attack him. It gave him a chance to do the right thing. What he did with that chance was going to tell the room everything they needed to know about who actually had been making excuses all along. The final week before the dinner, Harlan became oddly warm. Compliments about my work. Jokes that were meant to feel inclusive. The specific performance of someone who had sensed a shift in conditions and was trying to return to previous dynamics through charm. Sabine noticed it immediately. He's trying to soften you, she said. Cassian said, he's scared. When Harlan gets nice, it means he's scared. I kept my face steady and my plan unchanged. I printed my full documentation, organized it chronologically, made a second copy, kept both in separate locations. The night before the dinner, my mom called. She sounded like she'd been bracing for this conversation. Please don't embarrass him, she said. Whatever you're planning, please. I held the phone for a moment. He embarrassed himself, I said. The day he decided that stealing from people was fine as long as he called it business. Mom started crying. I stayed on the call. Let her cry. Didn't collapse back into the old reflex of adjusting my choices to manage her comfort. When I hung up, I was shaking. Not from doubt. I had no doubt about what I was doing. From the recognition of what breaking a toxic system actually required. It required watching people you loved beg you to stay inside it. And choosing to leave anyway. I met Juno outside her office the morning of the event. The envelope was official. Her firm's letterhead. The demand outlined on 2 pages with supporting references to the documentation submitted to the labor agency pending response. She handed it to me. This gives him a chance, she said. A real one. Everything that happens after is his decision. I nodded. Took the envelope. Drove to Harlan's office. He was already in. Jacket on. The energy of someone who had a performance to prepare for. I placed the envelope in the center of his desk. He looked at it. Then at me. What's this? He asked. A deadline, I said. Harlan picked it up, turned it over once. The expression of someone who had received something unfamiliar in a familiar space. Then he laughed, short, dismissive. Excuses in an envelope, he said. Open it, I said. He set it back down, slid it to the corner of the desk, like ignoring an object was the same as making it not exist. See you tonight, he said. His smile was completely comfortable. The smile of a person who had gotten very good at believing that consequences were things that happened to other people. I walked out of his office. He had no idea the deadline had already started running. The venue was full by the time I arrived. Donors in good clothing, business partners shaking hands, staff standing near the edges with the specific posture of people who were required to be present rather than invited. Harlan stood at the center of it, glowing. He gave his welcome remarks, thanked people for their contribution to the company's success, told a story about building something from nothing through sheer persistence. Then his eyes found me at a table near the front. His smile widened. I want to take a moment, he said into the microphone, to talk about motivation. He looked directly at me as he delivered the setup, building the rhythm he'd been planning. One niece has a career, he said. The other has excuses. Polite, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. I stood up. Calmly, without rushing, without visible anger. I walked to the front table and placed a second envelope on the plate in front of him, identical to the first. Stamped with the agency complaint reference number Juno had prepared. Harlan's smile faltered. I looked at the room. My voice was clear and completely steady. You have until Friday at 5 p.m. to correct wages and cease retaliation. That is the deadline. The room went very still. Harlan stared at the envelope, then at me. What are you doing? He said, into the microphone, voice dropping its warmth. I met his eyes. Ending excuses, I said. Harlan's face went red. He gripped the microphone with the energy of someone trying to recover a room that was no longer moving in his direction. She's unstable, he said loudly, performing confusion for the audience, looking around for the nodding faces he expected to find. Cassian stood up, from the back of the room. Steady. No, Cassian said. He stole wages from the drivers. Another driver stood up beside him. He reclassified our overtime. It's been happening for 2 years. Sabine stood. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was clear. He deleted files from the company drive when people started asking questions, and he has unpaid payroll taxes going back 18 months. The room shifted. Not loudly, but completely. The donors were looking at Harlan with different eyes now. The business partners were very still. The staff along the edges were looking at each other with the specific expression of people who recognized what they were watching. Harlan tried to smile, tried to deploy the warmth that had always brought rooms back to him. People are emotional, he said into the microphone. This is what happens when. The event coordinator stepped in from the side. Sir, she said firmly, we need to pause the program. Harlan's grip on the microphone tightened, like it was the last thing that made him powerful in this room. Then slowly, in the silence, he understood. The microphone couldn't save him from documented facts. By Thursday, Harlan tried to negotiate. He called with the practiced reasonableness of someone who had realized the comfortable position was no longer available. Partial payment. He could arrange partial payment, and he needed things kept quiet. Family, he said. I let him finish. Pay what you owe, I said. All of it. By Friday at 5. Or the complaint moves forward. He missed the deadline. Juno filed. The agency audit opened within 2 weeks. The scope of the documentation made the process move faster than average. Vendors who had been watching from a comfortable distance began stepping back. Business partners who had been in the room for the gratitude dinner recalibrated their association. Staff left. The ones who had stayed quiet for years because they believed the cost of speaking was too high finally understood that the cost of staying had been higher. My mom called me on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the dinner. Cassian's wife had come to the door of their house. She had tears in her eyes. She had said, "Because of Ione, we can pay rent this month." My mom was crying when she told me. She didn't say I was right. She wasn't ready for that yet, but she stopped asking me to stay quiet. Sabine found a position at a different company. Her own work, her own name on it. No comparison required. I started a new role at a firm that valued the skills I had built under pressure. Skills for documentation, accuracy, and staying steady when the person across from you had the louder voice. The following Thanksgiving, I didn't go to Harlan's table. I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Odelia, my mom, Cassian and his wife, a few people who had never needed to rank anyone to feel good about themselves. I looked at the table and understood something clearly. The deadline I had given Harlan was real, and it had mattered. But the more important deadline was the one I had finally set for myself. A deadline on how long I would allow anyone to look at my survival and call it an excuse. When that deadline passed, my life finally started.